Good evening, and thank you all for joining us. This evening, we will be providing a complete update on our federal, state, and local efforts. We have FDA updates, as well as our introduction to the American Kratom Association Hall of Fame program. To kick us off this evening, we are joined by Matt Salmon, former United States Representative of Arizona, as well as the chairman of the American Kratom Association, as well as Matt Caddo, Senior Fellow on Public Policy. Matt, I will now turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. Appreciate it. Appreciate the participation tonight. I think I say this every time we have one of these, but we're at a really critical juncture right now. And the thing that has always helped us out of a jam has been our incredible advocacy network in the American Kratom Association. And this is a time when we really got to ramp up our efforts. This next week, several of us are going to be in California, where one of the cities, Newport Beach, is contemplating a ban on kratom, and we're going to be there fighting the fight. And I know the advocates are going to be out and helpful. And I know Mac's going to talk a lot about our efforts from the federal through the states down to even the local jurisdictions that we're engaged in. But I just wanted to take a minute to thank from the bottom of my heart the advocates. It was many of you in the advocacy network that first gave me my understanding of what kratom's all about back in 2015, before we ended up fighting with the FDA, or excuse me, with not just the FDA, but the FDA and the DEA on their proposal to schedule kratom, and we were able to put forward a very monumental effort in the Congress to put them on their heels and to stop that, a bipartisan effort. But it would have never ever happened without the advocacy that is out there. And I know that you all believe in the positive attributes of kratom and what it can do for not only human suffering, but people dealing with addiction. And because of you, I got engaged because you convinced me that it was the right thing to do. And many years later, I'm still a strong believer that we're on the right side of this, and science is our science is on the right side of this. But tonight, besides Mac giving us a presentation on what's going on, both at the federal, state, and local levels, we're also going to induct some folks into the Kratom Advocacy Hall of Fame, and I just want to congratulate you and thank you. It's never been more important to be involved and to be vocal and to stand up for what we believe. And so God bless you for all your efforts. Thank you. And I'll turn it back to Ryan, I think, or I might turn it over to you, Mac.
I'm actually going to take the lead on the Hall of Fame because I actually stole this from Ryan, because I wanted to be able to describe some of the procedures that we used here and recognize that we are not going to have a perfect list at the end of this discussion. We are open to additional names to be added to the Legacy Hall of Fame. And that category is defined as those individuals who were instrumental in getting this fight started, in sustaining the fight, and in making sure that the resources and the commitment from the advocates was available to take this fight to Washington, as former Congressman Salmon just mentioned, in order to carry to the doorstep of the nation's capital this important effort. In 2016, when I was called by Susan Ash and asked if I would come on as a lobbyist to help the American Kratom Association, I told her that it was impossible to do anything about what had happened, because the FDA had used a obscure section of the Controlled Substances Act regulations in order to implement what is an easier pathway to scheduling. And in 82 previous scheduling efforts under that section, it's called the Emergency Powers section, which was designed, by the way, to take off street drugs that pop up and then they go away as fast as they pop up, but they kill people along the way. That's what that section of the law was designed to do. but the FDA manipulated their way into that. And I explained to Susan that there really wasn't much chance that we were going to be able to overcome that burden because of the previous experience with it. Well, I was wrong. And what I didn't know, and it's really the reason that we're honoring people tonight, is the power of the Kratom advocacy community. So our effort here is to start the recognition process. We invited people to make nominations of various people that they knew had been involved early on in this effort. And of course, we had an interesting array of nominations. Some people told us, well, you probably don't know this person, but they were very instrumental. They weren't the front line person along the way. So we recognized some of those. I also had some people say, well, I know you'll never recognize this person, but they really did have a large part in this effort. And to suggest that, it merely misunderstands what we're doing here. This is not about personal issues. It's not about philosophical divides. And it's not even about some of the personalities involved, because this really is about taking a moment to recognize people that selflessly made their commitment. And it doesn't matter if they're supporters of AKA today or not. What matters is their devotion to this, their commitment to it, and getting this effort underway as we go forward. So with that, and understanding that this is a dynamic process, we are going to add people to the Legacy Hall of Fame. Going forward, every 6 months, we're going to hold another open round of nominations for the Hall of Fame for the AKA that will recognize those advocates that are currently involved in initiatives, new advocates that joined us and who deserve recognition along the way. So in the initial class of the Legacy Hall of Fame, and understand, as I said, this is going to be added on. And if you get to the end of the evening and someone that you believe is deserving of this honor, reach out to us. We either didn't get the nomination or we weren't aware of the individual, or in the evaluation of the committee that looked at these, they just may not have understood the contribution these individuals make. The first category of our Legacy Hall of Fame is appropriately designated to those scientists who stood up. I remember clearly when Jack Henningfield called me out of the blue, a person whom I had only known about professionally but never had met personally, and he volunteered on a pro bono basis to write the 8-factor analysis that the DEA had required of the FDA to produce before they would consider the further scheduling after the initial scheduling recommendation had been withdrawn. And so Jack Henningfield obviously is deserving of this honor as one of the scientists. Chris McCurdy, who has been researching science since his days back in the University of Mississippi in the early 2000s, maybe even the mid-1990s, where he started to develop the fundamental foundation for understanding what kratom was, what its identity, and what its potential benefits were. Oliver Grundmann, who's at the University of Florida, also became a very important part of the research engine that was driving towards the kind of understanding of kratom that was desperately needed. Mark Swager, who obviously from the side of the understanding the psychological impacts and the benefits that potentially kratom has for people and that are suffering from some of the mental health issues, was an important voice moving forward. And Paula Brown, who stepped forward early on and started to challenge the FDA's thinking about kratom with some very incisive scientific research and opinions that were provided. And finally, in the science class of this Legacy Hall of Fame, Walter Proziazak, who really did make an enormous contribution as he started to analyze the consumer behaviors and the scientific background for kratom, how it potentially could become the harm reduction tool identified as that going forward. He also helped us to understand the importance of the purity of the plant and how it was formulated along the way. So those individuals are in the category of the scientists who made a difference. The second category would be those politicians who stood up. And this was not something that was well understood or well known by anyone. What was kratom? It took unique individuals, unique leaders to step up to lead those members of Congress by their influence to join in the letter that ultimately led to 51 members of the House signing a letter and 13 members of the Senate to the DEA, telling them to not schedule kratom. And it was critical at that juncture for that influence to be heard. And obviously, on the Republican side of the aisle, in that 51 members of the House who signed the letter, you had 26 Republicans and 25 Democrats. Matt Salmon led that battle as the representative from the state of Arizona. He understood the kratom issue, was in fact one of the great promoters of the Right to Try Act that was eventually passed by the U.S. Congress. He was a visionary about that kind of thing and allowing people to have the individual choice to do things that could help them. He was joined by Congressman Mark Pocan, who remains today in the Congress as our leading advocate on the House side for kratom, and he has been a stalwart as we've moved forward, and he certainly is deserving of being included in the among the politicians who are being recognized this evening. Cory Booker, who took a different path, and as I met with him in 2016, he said, "I'm not going to sign on to the letter that's being circulated because I think it misses an important point," and that point being that the overcriminalization of people by using the Controlled Substances Act in order to make it a felony for people, and in this case, people using kratom. And he was passionate about it. He recruited a couple of his colleagues to sign a separate letter. And that, of course, was very helpful in the evaluation that was done by the Drug Enforcement Administration to see that unique and different perspective that was completely valid. And finally, posthumously, Orrin Hatch, member of the United States Senate at the time, who was a champion for dietary supplement and botanical products for his entire term in the United States Senate, and was viewed by his colleagues as the thought leader with respect to FDA policies. And so he certainly is deserving of this recognition as well. Then there are a number of the early adopters of kratom from the business perspective that were important because they were providing products to the consumer population. They had made the investment and took the risk that was associated with getting into this business and defending it. Some of these people, and I know I've already heard from some that are worried that we were going to recognize them, and your fear is coming true here tonight, because again, this isn't about the personal feelings that we have, but rather the contributions that were made by some of these people. And so as you see and hear these names, please understand that this is about, at the time, what these individuals did in order to move forward with us and to help us. In that category, Sebastian Guthrie. Sebastian is a unique person in that he's currently under indictment by the U.S. government, has pled guilty to importation of kratom under false pretenses, but he certainly was a leader early on in the kratom community in making an effort to make sure that there was a supply of kratom raw materials being provided in the United States, and he deserves the honor of being in our Legacy Hall of Fame. Steve Curtis, who was the first NDIN that was submitted to the FDA, and it was denied as all subsequent ones were denied, but he got out in front of this issue and went to the FDA and put an enormous amount of his own personal capital and his good name on the line, and got whacked by the FDA unfairly at the time, and yet he took it, and he took it for the community, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. Sean Zaramaro and Megan, who were one of the early vendors in the kratom space, who always had integrity, always followed the rules, and always wanted to make sure the consumers were kept safe. I think that goes as well for Matt and Melissa Frank, who are recognized on the same basis as we go forward here. David Darian, who is one of the pioneers in the kratom vendor community, who has been a foot soldier and willing to commit whatever resources are needed in order to help make certain that the public maintains access to kratom here in the United States. And he is one of the great leaders and a man with whom I have enormous respect because he's always there, always ready to go. And his sidekick, Duncan McRae, who's been enormously influential over in Southeast Asia and in the development of product formulations that are of great benefit to consumers in the United States. Dan Bauer, who was an early importer of kratom and worked hard to make sure that the quality of the raw materials were kept safe as he went forward, and he certainly is one of the pioneers and leaders in this area. Chris Fiamora, who early on was ready to help in any way possible, went out and hired a lobbying firm on his own in order to fight the initial ban in 2016. And while he's not as directly involved in the kratom industry anymore, he was a industry leader in helping us go forward. Many of you know Derek Connors. Derek was a combination of a fierce personal advocate for kratom. That's why he got into the kratom business in the first place. He was tied directly to this passion that he had because of the benefits that kratom actually provides to people. Keith Pascucci, which obviously has been a great advocate along the way for us and has helped tremendously. Jessica Girding, who's been a leader in importation issues and in the distribution of kratom raw materials in a high quality level in order to protect consumers going forward. And finally, in that category of the industry leaders, Sean Brady from Mint 45 and Dalton Locke. These are foot soldiers. They are warriors. They're always there to stand up and fight. And whenever they're called upon, they're there in order to fight the good fight and to be able to actually deliver when it comes and critical issues are before us. We have a number of very strong advocates who have gone beyond just being personal advocates, but have made an outreach and had an influence over the advocacy community. Brian Gallagher, most recently with Kratom Science. Mike Overstreet, the Kratom Guy, which many of you watch his podcast along the way. Drew Turner. Now, Drew probably isn't in the category of being on social media a lot, but you cannot see the history of what happened in 2016 and not know that his influence, his story, his testimony that drew so much media attention was obviously influential. Melody Wolf, one of the most prolific researchers that I have ever had the opportunity to observe in the work that she does, and that she spreads the advocacy work and the information in the kratom community and continues to do so regularly. Cami Davis, who has a strong following in the kratom community, who has her heart in the right place here, is fighting constantly to make sure that we're informed about what's going on, what our enemies are doing, what our friends are doing, all of the things that are necessary in the advocacy space. Cami has been a virtual warrior there. Misty Brown, who's similarly the same way. She has a master of social media. I was kidding her on another phone call about how we recently invited some of those advocates to come to the Champs trade show and work our booth and meet people. And what a great decision that was. Ryan, that was a master stroke because so many people told us, well, we have a real face to the kratom community. And Misty obviously helped us with that. Dion Evans. I mean, how in the world could anyone talk about the kratom community, understanding what happened with in the kratom community, and not know that obviously Dion was so influential, continues to be to this day, and she suffers tremendous physical limitations and overcomes them every day. There's not a person that's more deserving than she is of this honor that we're giving to her tonight. It's heartfelt, it's sincere, and we believe in it. Some of the advocates that have stepped up, who have gone beyond just the typical thing that you expect whenever they're called upon. They're ready to rally, and they'll make personal sacrifices in order to help. You've got Heidi Sikora, Isla Webster, Elizabeth Gardner, Kyler Waldron, Leisha Adcock, Nick Keenan Bauer. These are people that inspire others with their efforts, with their work, and they're always there in a pinch and never say no when it comes to advocacy work that we need, and we need them to step up. So we honor them along the way. And finally, in the last category of these legacy Hall of Fame members, we recognize those people that got the whole effort started in the American Kratom Association. The original board of directors, Susan Ash, as the president of the AKA. Her passion is unmatched for this plant and for the effort. And without her leadership at the time, we wouldn't have been successful. And she was supported by a wonderful group of people that served on the board of directors selflessly, and they made a real difference in the way things turned out for us. Paul Kemp, Angela Ross, Robin Graham, and William Robin. every one of us in the Kratom community is in their debt. And this is something that from our standpoint deserves recognition. It is something that we will continue to recognize them going forward. And this legacy class that we have identified so far, and we expect that there'll be some others who will be added as you look at this list, and it hopefully sparks some memory. Looks at it and says, well, how could they have missed this person? We want to hear from you. So please extend those nominations. But congratulations to every single person that we have had on this list in recognition because of the contributions they individually made, the sacrifices that they were able to make and willing to make, and obviously the continued commitment to our cause, all of which are appreciated and all of which will be duly recognized by the entire Kratom community as we go forward. As I said earlier, there's some names on this list that might surprise you, but you shouldn't be, because this is, again, not about the current state of personalities or disputes that we may have. We recognize at the American Kratom Association that we have critics, and some of that criticism is deserved. We don't want those to be dividing things. We want the bridge to be there to know that we share the common belief and goal that Kratom needs to remain accessible to the American people. And that will only happen, and the success we've had so far is only derivative of this unified community that continues to work going forward. So we thank you, we honor you. You will see your names up on a section of our website probably in the next month. And we're going to be asking for pictures from these individuals who've been honored so that you, and a little bio so that you can all get a good flavor of who they are. And if you have the occasion to see them, you'll know who they are, and you can say thank you to them as we are doing this evening with this tremendous recognition that we think is overdue, but now is in place. And as I mentioned earlier too, going forward, every 6 months, we will open up a new set of nominations that will recognize the advocates into our Hall of Fame who are currently engaged and not yet recognized for all of the great efforts that they are engaging in along the way. And so I'll transition from that to what the successes are, what our challenges that are in front of us will be. First, let me talk about the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act. We are working right now with individual offices in the U.S. Congress, setting up meetings with constituents in specific congressional districts with those offices, either in the congressman or the U.S. senator. Those meetings are going well. The purpose of it is to introduce Kratom to them, to help them understand the value that Kratom has, to offset some of the arguments that are made by our critics, to fight with science, not with opinion, not with speculation, and not from a position of anger, which many of our critics do. And certainly not from the position of the trial attorneys who exploit these unfortunate circumstances that they are trying to make a money off of when we really ought to be engaged in a common pursuit to protect the American public with good regulations, good labeling as we go forward. And that's the goal of the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act. In this election year, our efforts are going to be to secure and build the support in the U.S. Congress, eventually through adding people as co-sponsors that are members of Congress or the Senate to the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act, knowing that next year when the Congress reconvenes, that we'll be in a position to move forward with the actual work that's going to be done to make sure that the KCPA gets passed. We're seeing some things that are happening at the federal level that are enormously helpful. The first trigger event that has started to bring the house of cards that the FDA has built over the last 10 years about Kratom to come crashing down. The first is in the Guthrie case, and many of you have seen this, where when the federal judge in the Southern District of California ordered the FDA to come to his courtroom, a hearing that was scheduled for February 8th last month, and tell, based on the evidence and data and witnesses that the FDA has, why they believe Kratom is dangerous. And the stunning development in that case. And remember, this was a case that was initiated against Sebastian Guthrie by the FDA. They were the ones that asked the Department of Justice to actually bring this case. And then when the federal judge ordered them into his courtroom and said this will be a hearing based solely on the evidence as to whether Kratom is dangerous or not, and the FDA responded officially refusing to come to the court in order to provide that evidence and data. And the explanation they provided through the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of Southern California and the Federal District Court in Southern California was that they have not yet come to the determination as to whether kratom is dangerous or not. Now think about that. They put in the Federal Register on August the 31st of 2016, and then repeated it again in a submission to the DEA in 2017, Factor 6 of the Controlled Substances Act requirements for scheduling of substances, which says, and in this case, kratom poses an eminent safety risk to the American people. And yet, when called to testify under oath, they refuse to do so because they, the FDA, have not yet determined whether kratom is dangerous or not. Then, and of course, this was the sort of the flare up into the night as to why they did that. We find out in a discussion that was had by a deputy commissioner of the FDA before a webinar before a group that's called the Alliance to make FDA Stronger, I think is the name of it, where that deputy commissioner revealed when asked the question about what the current posture is at the FDA on CBD and kratom, she explained that the agency was exploring additional authorities they needed in order to properly regulate to make sure that CBD and kratom, the manufacturers did it correctly, that the products were labeled correctly, that the controls on the distribution points and the point of sale, they were not selling to kids. This sounds like the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. It's what we want. We want to make sure there's good labeling, good manufacturing. We want to keep it out of the hands of kids. And now the FDA is publicly stating that's their objective. A far cry from then FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb in 2016, standing up and saying that kratom was killing people, that kratom was an opioid, that kratom was responsible for numerous adverse events, all of which turned out to be untrue. Now, no question that kratom can, in fact, cause adverse events if it is adulterated and if someone, a consumer, abuses it. That's true for hundreds, if not thousands, of consumer products that are available today. But the regulatory framework for dietary supplements and botanical supplements under federal law doesn't restrict the availability of a product because some consumer might abuse it or because that product might, on occasion, be involved in some sort of an adverse event. And remember what the FDA was saying when they tried to associate kratom deaths, and they trotted out their numbers, starting in 2016 with 33 deaths, went in 2017 to 44 deaths. And now if you look at their various documentation, they say there are hundreds of deaths. But they acknowledge on the FDA and kratom website today that the vast majority of those are polydrug use and other the drugs implicated. They know that kratom, it's a rare event that kratom might be implicated, and they don't even know for certain that if that's true, that kratom might be implicated in an overdose death. Now, part of the reason that that's true is that the scientists have looked hard at this, and they've not yet found a dose that a person could ingest of kratom that would cause an overdose. That's an important point. Even the strongest critics of kratom in the scientific community, housed at NMS Labs in Philadelphia, Barry Logan, their vice president, has told me personally that they had always believed that kratom was implicated in these deaths. But after they have examined all of the death reports that they've seen, they published a paper for the NMS Labs people, peer-reviewed and published, where they admit that there is no known level of toxicity for kratom. That's the science. Our critics are not going to like it. They're going to say, oh, that's not what it says. Of course, that's what it says. There is no known level of toxicity for kratom. Doesn't mean that kratom's safe, don't get me wrong, per se. It just says that if it's responsibly used, and you'd have to work hard to irresponsibly use it, that kratom is not implicated. They suggested in their paper that it should be a concern for medical examiners evaluating tox screens if the kratom presence in the tox screen, the metrogenine, is greater than 1,000 nanograms per milliliter. The number of deaths that are attributed to kratom today, the ones that are charged by the trial attorneys in their complaints, 90% of them go away under that standard. And what we have left is then an evaluation, and I would argue a fair one, by a court to determine whether kratom was actually the cause of death. And then you look at the evidence that was provided by the Centers for Disease Control, the commentary in the New England Journal of Medicine, where they evaluated claims by medical examiners where kratom was detected in the tox screen. And they say that they believe that kratom, in 7 deaths, kratom was the cause of death out of the 91 that they identified as kratom being present. And it's important that those deaths, 7 deaths, when they were examined with more sophisticated equipment and analytical tools, were determined for those that had blood samples available to be polydrug use. So there is no scientific evidence. People can have opinions, people can have beliefs, particularly the families that have had issues where they've lost a family member, where the trial attorneys or they themselves believe the kratom was the cause of death. That's fine. You can hold an opinion, but science is what drives the public policy decisions. And I think that's the critical factor. So the point of all of this is that the FDA, in a scientific symposium that was convened at the University of Florida on February 15th, a representative of the Food and Drug Administration made a presentation on the FDA's dose finding study. Now, this is important. It's important to every one of us because what happened in that case, as much as they disclosed, and the FDA representative lamented the fact that he had been reined in and actually censored by FDA brass minutes before he made his presentation, but he declared that. But then he said that kratom was well tolerated across all dose levels. This is a single ascending dose study with human beings. 40 people participated. They had 32 actual participants and 8 placebo people. They wouldn't have known what they were getting. They took an increasing dose level of kratom. This is a safety study. They got to 12 grams, which is an unusually large amount of kratom to ingest at any one time. These are all brand new kratom users. They didn't take people into the study that had a use of kratom before. They didn't want anyone who built up a tolerance to it or anything like that. These are brand new people that had never used kratom before. And of those 40 people in that test, they found that when it got to 12 grams, that 2 of the participants experienced nausea. Now, they had to consume 12 grams of kratom, 24 capsules in a 5-minute period. When I was explaining this to a legislative panel earlier this week, one of the legislators blurted out, well, I'd gag on 24 capsules of that size, no matter what was in it, and experienced nausea. This is why the conclusion of the FDA representative is that it appears that kratom is well tolerated at all dose levels. This was a safety study. Our critics can say what they want. It is a blow to the trial attorneys who, if you look at their complaints, every single one of them leads out with the FDA says kratom is dangerous. Now you have the FDA refusing to testify under oath that that's true. And now you have the scientific data and the start of that scientific data, because now the FDA will embark on and is authorized to do so because of the safety data they accumulated with the single ascending dose study. They now go to the human abuse potential study, which may take a couple of years, maybe as long as 4 years. We'll know for certainty. But along the way, without there being a flare signal that there is a serious problem with kratom, which there isn't, and you just have to look at the FAERS database to see if there are drug interactions, if there's a significant problem, they simply don't have it. So our effort now is to go forward, making certain that we have proper regulations to eliminate from the marketplace those products that are adulterated, that are spiked beyond the levels for concentrations that can reasonably be extracted using an FDA food solvent in order to develop a kratom product. That's our goal. That's where we want to be at the end of the day. And again, our critics can yell and scream all they want. It's about science. And it's about a reasonable regulatory model. And I hope that not the leaders of these groups, because they are extremists, no question about it. Just read the kind of horrific, nasty stuff that they write about the AK and about me personally and other people that are advocates in the community. They do nothing to restrain that. They don't remove those kind of posts. They are extremists. But the vast majority of people that are involved in these groups, I think, are people of goodwill that would understand there's a significant benefit rather than where a ban is not possible based on the science, that we should regulate these products because we believe in that. We think the regulation should be on good manufacturing practices. We think that the labels should declare specifically for the product formula that is being purchased what the recommended serving size is based on safety, what the number of serving sizes that you can consume during the day, what the ingredients are of the plant with limitations on some constituents to make sure that they are not synthetically enhanced, and making sure there's no adulterants in it that would be dangerous to the consumer that's taking it, labeled with warnings so that you understand that any reasonable person for that product formulation should be consulting with their doctor, should avoid certain behaviors while they are using kratom. These are important things that need to be done. And finally, we advocate for an age limit on the purchase of kratom. These are the kinds of things that we're pushing for and that we're justified in doing so, and we're going to continue to do so. At the state level, we obviously have 11 states that have passed the KCPA. We have a number of hearings that are coming up. We just had one in Maryland. The bill passed the committee, the subcommittee in the House, now going to the full committee, and we expect to be on the floor here shortly. We have great optimism that we're going to work there. We're doing well in North Carolina. We are going to beat the ban in South Carolina. We're going to beat the ban we have beaten the ban in Mississippi. We're going to beat the ban in Nebraska. There hasn't been a new ban that's been enacted since Rhode Island did in 2017 at the behest of the FDA on the false claim by the FDA that kratom was about to be scheduled at the federal level and that it was dangerous. We all know all of that is gone up in smoke. And now we're fighting hard in those states that have previously passed a ban to unwind those. We had a disappointment in Wisconsin, had nothing to do with kratom. It had to do with a power play politically between the parties there, where they were trying to get a concession from the leadership in the Wisconsin House that they were unwilling to give. It had nothing to do with kratom. We'll be back next year fighting that, but we're alive and fighting and kicking in a number of other states, and will continue to carry this battle forward in order to protect the consumers along the way. So I don't want to belabor this point. We've kept you here a pretty long time already, but we certainly will open up the floor for questions, which you can put into the Q&A on the chat, and we'll do our best to work on these things. And Misty just made the point, don't forget Bud Smith. Now, context. The people that are actively working for us today and have done since 2016, we're going to recognize them. And Bud Smith is a magnificent advocate. He just completed a number of rounds, an enormous number of contacts in the New York legislature. And I think that's absolutely great. And we will get to these people. We will recognize them along the way. There was just a fine line between the early advocates and all of that. So Misty also asked, what about Mississippi? We are dead in Mississippi for the ban, and we're also dead in the KCPA. That's because the president of the Senate said, I'm not going to let one or the other go through. He understood that the ban was simply ridiculous. And so that's just one of those things that we're going to continue to fight on. We're going to be alive and fighting in Mississippi next year along the way, and we're going forward. In South Carolina, the ban that is proposed there, we're fighting back hard against it. I've had conversations with the sponsor. I think that the whole problem in South Carolina was a report attributed to an adverse event that was experienced by a family there with a son who had some mental health issues, and they thought that kratom created more problems for him. And so that's why this legislator believed it was the right thing to do. He didn't have any background other than that. He's been willing to listen to us, and we're working hard there. Michigan, the same situation. We lost our great champion, Lori Stone, who ran for and won a seat, or I'm sorry, the mayorship of one of the cities. The majority leader of the House has picked up the bill, and so we're going to continue to move forward. We're making great progress in many, many of these states as we go forward. And I see recommendations for other people to be added. We're going to do that. We couldn't get to everyone, and we really need to have new recommendations made for our next round. We'll add to the legacy ones, as I said. So please add those, but give us a narrative as why. Some of these people we didn't recognize, our committee didn't recognize. So tell us exactly what that individual did in the 2016 to 18 range, And then we'll consider that and add them into the Legacy Hall of Fame where it's appropriate. But certainly, we're going to add new advocates that have been active since 2016-18 period, and we're going to recognize them as well. We want to recognize people that have been champions for us going forward. It was not our intent in any way to exclude anyone going forward. We think we have a solid list, but it's not a perfect list. And so we're open to more suggestions as we go forward. So any other questions anyone has? If
Yeah,
not,
really great, Mac. Thank you so much for such a comprehensive update. Matt, if you have any closing comments, otherwise, no other questions here.
All right, guys, just trying to get unmuted. Mac, that was a great presentation. Again, this whole Hall of Fame idea, I think, is a great idea. You need to recognize folks for the good that they've done, but it's a work in progress. You know, there will be lots and lots of other folks added to this as time goes on, but the more important thing is let's keep the advocacy on hyperdrive. We need it more than ever right now, and so thank you for all your great work. And Ryan, thank you for giving me the opportunity to close. And Mac, great job. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Matt. And one last commercial.
Yep.
Next Tuesday at 4 p.m., Newport Beach City Council. We need every advocate who can make it to stand up against this ban. It was proposed by the police chief. They simply do not understand what is going on. The police chief is misguided on this. We're going to be there fighting, but we need your voices there. We need you to stand up and tell the story about why kratom should not be banned and why the appropriate regulatory framework needs to be put into place. So please show up there. Encourage, if you don't live near the area, you know, you've got friends and fellow kratom consumers, get them to come and commit to show up with where we're going. Brooke just asked a couple quick questions and I'll answer those. In Colorado, the Department of Revenue overreached, tried to get too much power, too much regulatory authority, spent too much money. We now have the Kratom Consumer Protection Act without that overregulation. It is the law in Colorado, and we're going to continue to negotiate with them, but they have to do it in good faith, and they haven't done so far. Secondly, in Montana, Montana meets every other year. I met personally with the president of the Senate, who confided in me that he only did it because of a request from one of his constituents. He will be on board with the KCPA when Montana convenes next January, and I have commitments from other leaders in the Montana legislature that they will do the same. So this is great stuff. We're going to continue to work on it. I know Ed just expressed a concern about Indiana. We have a problem in Indiana that is not easily overcome. We won in the House, 54-30 vote, or 53-40, and we got to the Senate, and it is an awful situation where the chairman of an influential committee there just doesn't believe that kratom should somehow be available. So hopefully this new revelation by the FDA, which kicks back their position and kicks it in the teeth, will be influential there. But we're going to continue to fight. And again, the Misty asked the Newport Beach hearing next Tuesday, 4 p.m. at the City Council chamber, which you can Google there in Newport Beach. And Matt Salmon's going to be there. Senator Kirk Bramble from Utah is going to be there. I will be there. And we have a number of advocates that we've committed to be there. We have letters coming in from a former judge in the Orange County area opposing this. And we've got Congressman Jack Bergman that's framing a letter to send to them because that's an area that it has a lot of veterans are there, and he's a champion for this issue on the veterans. But the most important voice would be a local constituent in Newport Beach to stand up and tell that city council that they need to protect your access to kratom. I promise that's the last thing I'm going to say, Brian.
I think we're good. Thank you all so much, and we'll be in touch in a couple weeks. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.